Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the massive circular chamber, her hands clasped behind her back, as she watched the Galactic Council members take their positions. The chamber stretched upward for nearly a kilometer, its walls lined with viewing platforms where representatives from 347 species observed the proceedings. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting thousands of different languages into comprehensible speech. The humans had been part of this council for exactly 7 standard cycles now, ever since their discovery of faster-than-light travel had brought them to the attention of the galactic community. 7 cycles of being treated like children who had stumbled into an adult conversation. 7 cycles of having their concerns dismissed, their warnings ignored, and their intelligence questioned. Today would be different. Today, Sarah would deliver humanity's final warning. The council speaker, a towering Vorthak with crystalline skin that caught and reflected the chamber's bioluminescent lighting, raised one of its 4 arms. The gesture brought immediate silence to the assembly. When it spoke, its voice resonated through the chamber like wind chimes in a storm. "The council recognizes the human delegation," the speaker announced, its tone carrying the barely concealed irritation that had become familiar whenever humanity requested an audience. "Ambassador Chen, you have requested emergency session time. State your purpose." Sarah stepped forward onto the speaking platform, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon her. She had practiced this speech countless times, refined every word with Earth's best diplomats and strategists. The message was simple, clear, and urgent. Whether anyone would listen remained to be seen. "Honored council members," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "humanity stands before you today to issue our final warning regarding the void-touched incursions in the Outer Rim territories." A ripple of what could only be described as amused dismissal passed through the assembly. The Zelanti delegation actually laughed, their bird-like calls echoing off the chamber walls. The Horthak representative made a gesture with its tentacles that Sarah's cultural briefings had taught her was equivalent to rolling one's eyes. "The human continues with these fantasies," called out Ambassador Threx High of the Zelanti hegemony, his translator rendering his avian speech into crisp, condescending tones. 7 cycles we have endured these baseless fears about shadows in space. The void-touched are a myth, a superstition left over from primitive cultures. The chamber erupted in what passed for laughter among the various species. Sarah waited for the noise to die down, her expression never changing. She had expected this reaction. Humanity had been documenting void-touched activity for 3 years now, ever since their deep space exploration vessels had begun encountering the signs. Ships found drifting empty, their crews simply gone without any trace of struggle. Colonies on the edge of known space going silent, then being found completely evacuated with all infrastructure intact but no life remaining. The other species had dismissed every report, every piece of evidence, every desperate plea for a coordinated response. To them, humanity was still the newcomer species that had barely learned to leave their home system. What could they possibly know about threats that had supposedly evaded detection by civilizations thousands of years older? "The evidence continues to accumulate," Sarah continued, activating the holographic display at the center of the speaking platform. 3-dimensional star charts appeared in the air, showing the Outer Rim territories with marked incident locations. 47 colonies have gone silent in the past 6 months alone. 14 exploration fleets have vanished without sending any distress signals. "Coincidence and equipment failures," declared Councillor Vex then of the Korean Empire, her scaled head shaking dismissively. "Young species always see monsters in the darkness between stars. You will learn, as we all have, that space is vast and empty. Sometimes, ships break down. Sometimes, colonists give up and move elsewhere." The Koreans had been among the most vocal in dismissing human concerns. Their empire spanned over 2,000 systems, and they considered themselves the galaxy's premier military power. The idea that some unknown force could threaten their sovereignty was apparently too absurd to contemplate. Sarah switched the display to show detailed scans of the affected areas. "These are quantum signature readings from the affected systems," Notice the consistent pattern of space-time distortion that appears approximately 72 hours before each disappearance. The chamber fell into a more attentive silence as the technical data played out. Several species had delegations that specialized in quantum mechanics and spatial phenomena. Sarah could see some of them leaning forward, their various optical organs focusing intently on the readings. "Fascinating data manipulation," commented Dr. Yithkal, the Zelanti science coordinator, after studying the readings for several minutes. "Though I must say, creating false quantum signatures requires impressive technical skill. Perhaps humanity's entry into the galactic community has been more beneficial to their technological development than we initially calculated." The accusation hit the chamber like a physical force. Several delegations immediately began chattering among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sound. Sarah felt her jaw clench involuntarily. They weren't just dismissing the evidence anymore. They were accusing humanity of fabricating it entirely. "You believe we would falsify data about a potential galactic threat?" Sarah asked, her voice cutting through the noise. "You think humanity would waste the Council's time and resources on elaborate hoaxes?" "Young species often seek attention," replied the Council speaker, with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as the galactic equivalent of a patronizing pat on the head. "It is understandable that humanity would desire to establish relevance within our community. However, creating false emergencies is not the path to respect and recognition." The Vorthak's words sparked another round of agreements from the assembly. Sarah could see nods, gesture equivalents, and expressions of accord rippling through the various delegations. They had already made up their minds before she even began speaking. This wasn't a hearing. It was a formality they were enduring before returning to what they considered important business. "What would it take?" Sarah asked suddenly, cutting through the murmur of conversations. "What evidence would convince this council that the void touched represent a real and immediate threat to all our civilizations?" The question seemed to catch the assembly off guard. The speaker's crystalline features shifted in what might have been surprise. Several delegates exchanged glances with their colleagues, apparently not having expected such a direct challenge. "Direct contact," answered Councillor Vex then after a moment of consideration. "If these void-touched truly exist, then surely one of our civilizations would have encountered them by now. The Korean Empire alone has over 15,000 patrol vessels monitoring our borders. If there were some unknown force attacking colonies and fleets, we would have detected them." "Live capture of specimens," added Dr. Yithkal. "Biological samples, technology fragments, communication intercepts. Real evidence. Not simply empty space where things used to be." The Horthak representative gestured with several tentacles in rapid succession, their translator rendering the complex movement into speech. "Proof that satisfies scientific methodology, rather than fearful speculation based on incomplete data." Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting the gazes of as many delegates as possible. These beings represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, species that had mastered faster than light travel, conquered diseases, built megastructures that spanned star systems, and created technologies that seemed like magic to younger civilizations. They were also incredibly, almost impressively, arrogant. "Very well," Sarah said, her voice carrying a finality that seemed to surprise even herself. "Humanity accepts that our warnings have been insufficient. We understand that our evidence fails to meet your standards. We acknowledge that our concerns appear baseless to this distinguished assembly." The chamber had gone completely quiet now. Even the ambient hum of translation devices seemed muted. Sarah could feel the attention of every being present, focused on her words. "Therefore," she continued, "humanity formally withdraws our request for council assistance in dealing with the void-touched threat. We will handle this matter using our own resources and methods." A wave of confused murmuring swept through the assembly. The Korean delegates' scales actually ruffled in what Sarah recognized as their species equivalent of surprised laughter. "Handle what matter?" Councillor Vex then asked. "You speak as though this imaginary threat actually requires handling." "Humanity's position is clear," Sarah replied evenly. "We believe the void-touched represent an existential threat to all galactic civilization. Since the Council disagrees with our assessment, we will proceed independently. We formally request that all Council species maintain their current defensive postures and continue their normal patrol patterns. The speaker's crystalline features shifted into what might have been confusion. Ambassador Chen, your statement appears contradictory. If humanity truly believes in this threat, why would you request that we maintain normal defenses rather than increase them? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a pleasant expression. Because, she said, when the void touched reveal themselves, and they will, humanity wants it to be absolutely clear that the Council had every opportunity to prepare and chose not to. We want there to be no question about who tried to warn everyone and who chose to ignore those warnings. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates from dozens of species began talking simultaneously, their various forms of communication creating a wall of sound that the translation systems struggled to process. Some voices were angry, others confused, and a few carried what might have been the beginning of concern. Ambassador Threxhi's avian cry cut through the noise like a blade. Are you threatening the Council, human? Are you suggesting that your species will somehow manufacture this supposed threat to prove your point? No, Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the turmoil around her. I am telling you that humanity will remember this conversation. We will remember who listened and who laughed. We will remember who took our warnings seriously and who dismissed us as children playing with toys they don't understand. She paused, looking directly at the Council speaker. And when this is over, when the void touched have revealed themselves and shown the galaxy exactly what they are capable of, humanity will remember who stood with us when it mattered, and who stood against us when we needed allies most. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah had just done something unprecedented in Council history. She had essentially told the galaxy's most powerful civilizations that they would regret dismissing humanity. The implications were staggering, and every delegate in the chamber understood them perfectly. Ambassador Chen, the speaker said slowly, its voice carrying a warning tone, you would be wise to reconsider your words. The Council has shown patience with humanity's adjustment period. But that patience is not unlimited. Sarah nodded respectfully. And humanity has shown patience with the Council's inability to recognize a threat that has been growing for years. But you are correct. Honored speaker, patience is not unlimited. She turned to face the assembly one final time. Humanity withdraws our warning. We withdraw our request for cooperation. We withdraw our offers of shared intelligence and coordinated response. From this moment forward, each species will face the void touched according to their own capabilities and preparations. The weight of her words settled over the chamber like a shroud. Sarah had just formally declared that humanity was abandoning any pretense of cooperation on what they claimed was the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. Either they were bluffing on a scale that defied comprehension, or they knew something that no one else did. This session is adjourned, the speaker announced, its voice carrying an undertone of unease that hadn't been there at the beginning. The Council will consider humanity's statements and determine appropriate responses. As the delegates began filing out of the chamber, Sarah remained on the speaking platform, watching them go. She noticed that several of the smaller species representatives were looking back at her with what might have been concern. The major powers, however, maintained their dismissive attitudes, though she detected subtle signs of unease in some of their body language. Ambassador Threxhi approached the platform as the chamber emptied, his feathers ruffled in agitation. What game are you playing, human? He demanded, his translator rendering his words with sharp, clipped tones. Do you think you can intimidate the Council with vague threats and manufactured drama? Sarah looked down at him from the platform, her expression neutral. No game, Ambassador. No threats. Simply a statement of fact. She paused, studying his agitated posture. Tell me, how many Zelanti colonies do you have in the Outer Rim territories? The question seemed to catch him off guard. That information is classified military intelligence. 47, Sarah said calmly. 15 mining operations, 18 agricultural worlds, 12 research stations, and 2 military outposts. all within the zone where void-touched activity has been increasing. Threxhi's feathers went completely flat against his body, a sign of shock that Sarah recognized from her cultural briefings. "How could you possibly know our military deployment details?" he whispered. "The same way we know about the Korean Empire's patrol schedules, the Horthak trade routes, and the Vorthak colony ship movements," Sarah replied. "Humanity has been paying attention, Ambassador. We have been watching, learning, and preparing." She stepped down from the platform, bringing herself to eye level with the Zelanti delegate. "The question you should be asking yourself is not how we know, but why we are telling you." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Goodbye, Ambassador Threxhi. I hope your colonies have good communications equipment. You may need it sooner than you think." With that, Sarah walked past him toward the chamber exit, leaving the Zelanti delegate standing alone on the speaking floor. As she reached the massive doors, she could hear him frantically activating his communication device, presumably to contact his homeworld about the security implications of humanity's unexpected knowledge of Zelanti military positions. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as the chamber doors closed behind her. The first phase was complete. Humanity had officially warned the Council, and been officially dismissed. Everything that happened next would be entirely the Council's responsibility. In her private quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel, Sarah activated the secure communication array and sent a single coded message to Earth. The message consisted of only 3 words, but they would set in motion events that would reshape the entire galaxy. The message read, "Prometheus is lit." Within hours, that message would reach not only Earth but also the hidden human fleet positions throughout the galaxy, the covert research stations that had been monitoring void-touched activity, and the deep space installations that had been preparing for this moment for over 3 years. The Council had made their choice. They had dismissed humanity's warnings, questioned their evidence, and rejected their offers of cooperation. Now humanity would proceed alone, using methods and resources that would fundamentally alter how every species in the galaxy viewed the newcomers from Earth. The void-touched were coming, whether the Council believed in them or not, and when they arrived, they would find a galaxy divided between those who had heeded humanity's warnings and those who had chosen arrogance over wisdom. Sarah looked out at the stars through her quarters viewport, knowing that somewhere in that vast darkness, human ships were already moving into position. The next phase of the plan would begin soon, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical displays with the calm focus that had made her the youngest flag officer in human Space Force history. Around her, dozens of technicians monitored sensors, communication arrays, and the complex web of information that connected the human fleet scattered across 15 star systems. 3 weeks had passed since Ambassador Chen's final warning to the Galactic Council. 3 weeks of careful positioning, equipment checks, and the delicate ballet of moving an entire civilization's military assets into strategic positions without alerting the galaxy's most advanced sensor networks. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Park from the intelligence station, "we're receiving confirmation signals from all monitoring posts. Fleet units are in position and maintaining communication silence as ordered." Elena nodded, her eyes never leaving the primary display that showed the Outer Rim territories in real time. Red markers indicated confirmed void-touched activity zones, yellow markers showed areas of suspected incursions, and blue markers represented the positions of Council species colonies, patrol fleets, and infrastructure. What the display didn't show, and what only a handful of humans knew, were the green markers representing humanity's true positions. "Status report on the Council fleets?" Elena asked. "Maintaining standard patrol patterns across all monitored sectors," replied Commander Zhang from the Strategic Analysis Station. "The Korean Empire has actually reduced their Outer Rim presence by 12% following last week's budget allocation meeting. The Zelanti hegemony recalled 3 patrol squadrons for what they termed defensive modernization exercises closer to their core systems." Elena allowed herself a brief smile. The Council species were so confident in their superiority that they were actually pulling resources away from the areas where humanity expected the void-touched to reveal themselves. The arrogance that had led them to dismiss human warnings was now actively making them more vulnerable. "Admiral," interrupted Communications Officer Torres, her voice carrying an edge of urgency. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Outer Rim monitoring station designated Echo 7. They're reporting massive spatial distortions, consistent with void-touched manifestation events." The command center fell silent. Elena felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. "Put it on the main screen." The tactical display shifted to show the sensor readings from Echo 7, a hidden monitoring station that had been observing the Kelthara system for the past 18 months. The system contained a major Zelanti agricultural world, with over 60 million inhabitants, plus several orbital manufacturing platforms. What appeared on the screen made several of the younger officers gasp audibly. Space itself seemed to be tearing open. The quantum signatures were unlike anything in the known physics databases, showing readings that suggested reality was being folded, twisted, and reshaped by forces that operated outside normal spacetime. As they watched, the distortions began to stabilize into what could only be described as wounds in the fabric of space itself. "How long until the manifestation is complete?" Elena asked. "Based on previous observations, approximately 4 hours until full emergence," replied Commander Zhang, her voice tight with concentration. "The pattern matches 17 previous incidents, but the scale is significantly larger." Elena studied the readings carefully. Humanity had been tracking void-touched manifestation events for 3 years, building a database of their patterns and behaviors. Each time, the entities emerged from what appeared to be a parallel dimension, where the normal laws of physics operated differently. Each time, they consumed everything living in the target system before disappearing back into the void between dimensions. This manifestation was different. The energy signatures were nearly 10 times stronger than anything they had recorded previously. "Send a coded warning to the Zelanti colony," Elena ordered. "Use the diplomatic protocols Chen established. Make it clear that this is not a joke or a test." "Communications," Officer Torres hesitated. "Admiral, if we break communication silence, the Council will detect our monitoring capabilities. The time for hiding is over, Torres. Send the warning." Within minutes, the human diplomatic vessel still orbiting the Council chambers received the transmission and forwarded it through official channels to the Zelanti hegemony. Elena imagined Ambassador Threxhai receiving the message, probably dismissing it as another human fantasy, right up until he saw the attached sensor readings. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Park, "we're detecting movement in the distortion field. Something is coming through." "Startin'." The main display showed the spatial wounds beginning to disgorge objects that defied easy description. They appeared solid one moment and translucent the next, shifting between states of matter as though the concept of physical consistency was merely a suggestion to them. Their shapes seemed to hurt the eyes, following geometric patterns that the human brain couldn't quite process. "Void-touched vessels emerging," Commander Zhang reported, her voice professionally calm despite what they were witnessing. "Count is difficult to determine. The objects appear to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Give me your best estimate. At least 40 discrete entities, each approximately the size of a Council dreadnought. They're moving toward the inhabited world at..." "Admiral, this can't be right. They're traveling at nearly light speed within the system, without any detectable propulsion signatures." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Void-touched technology operated on principles that seemed to ignore most known physical laws. That was what made them so dangerous, and what made the Council's dismissal of the threat so catastrophic. "What's the response from the Zelanti colony?" They're laughing at us," Torres replied, disbelief clear in her voice. "Colony Administrator Yexhai is demanding to know why humans are sending elaborate science fiction scenarios to interfere with their agricultural production schedules. Show them the sensor data, already transmitted. They claim it's either fabricated or the result of malfunctioning human equipment." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. 60 million Zelanti were about to die, and they were refusing evacuation because they believed the warning was a human hoax. "Admiral," Commander Zhang said quietly, "we could intervene directly." Elena looked at her strategic analysis officer, seeing the same moral struggle in the woman's eyes that she felt in her own chest. They had the firepower to engage the void-touched weapon systems developed specifically for this type of threat. Human fleets were positioned throughout the region, ready to respond. But intervention would mean revealing capabilities that humanity had been developing in secret for years. It would show the galaxy that the primitive newcomers possessed technology and military assets that rivaled or exceeded the major powers. The political consequences would be enormous. More importantly, it would rob humanity of the credibility they would need when the larger void-touched incursion began. The Council would dismiss human intervention as somehow staged, another elaborate hoax designed to create a fake threat and then solve it for political gain. Negative, Elena said finally. We observe and record. The Council made their choice when they dismissed our warnings. The next 4 hours passed like a nightmare played out in slow motion. Elena and her crew watched as the void-touched entities approached the Zelanti colony world, their movement patterns defying every principle of orbital mechanics. The Colonial Defense Forces detected them approximately 1 hour before contact, but their attempts at communication met only silence. When the Zelanti finally opened fire, their weapons passed harmlessly through the void, touched vessels as though they were firing at ghosts. The entities seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, making conventional weapons useless against them. Admiral, the colony is broadcasting a general distress signal, Torres reported, her voice strained. They're requesting immediate assistance from any Council forces in the region. Response: the nearest Zelanti patrol squadron is 8 hours away at maximum burn. The Korean border fleet could reach the system in 12 hours, but they're requesting authorization from their high command. Elena watched the tactical display as the void-touched entities reached the planet's atmosphere. Instead of landing or attacking in any conventional sense, they simply absorbed. The life signatures across the planet's surface began disappearing in expanding waves, centered on each entity's position. What's happening to the population? She asked quietly. Commander Zhang checked her readings twice before answering. The life signs aren't indicating death, Admiral. They're simply ceasing to exist. No biological decay indicators, no heat signature changes. One moment they're there, the next moment they're not. And the void touched, growing stronger. Energy output from each entity is increasing proportionally to the population density they encounter. It's as though they're converting living matter directly into some form of exotic energy. The process took 6 hours. Elena and her crew documented every moment, recording sensor data that would later prove beyond question what had happened in the Kelthara system. When it was over, the planet remained physically intact, its cities and infrastructure completely untouched. But not a single living organism remained on its surface. The void-touched entities gathered above the dead world for several minutes, their energy signatures now nearly 5 times stronger than when they had first emerged. Then, one by one, they faded back into the dimensional wounds they had originally emerged from, taking their stolen life force with them. Send a full report to Earth, Elena ordered. Include all sensor readings, communication logs, and timeline analysis. Priority Alpha classification. Elena, 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 Elena. Aye, Admiral. Should we also transmit to Ambassador Chen? Negative. Chen needs to maintain her position until the Council requests information. When they do ask, we want it to be very clear that humanity has been monitoring the situation all along. Within hours, news of the Kelthara system disaster reached the Council chambers. Elena watched the emergency session through secured diplomatic channels, seeing the chaos and confusion that erupted when Ambassador Threxhai reported that his species' agricultural world had been completely depopulated by unknown forces. The official Council response was predictable. A joint investigation fleet was dispatched to examine the system, led by Korean military vessels with scientific support from multiple species. They would find exactly what humanity expected them to find: a dead world with no explanation for how 60 million inhabitants had simply vanished. More importantly, they would find no trace of the human monitoring station that had recorded the entire event from less than 50 astronomical units away. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Park said during the third day of watching Council investigation teams puzzle over the Kelthara system. We're receiving reports from our other monitoring stations. Void-touched manifestation events are being detected in 17 different systems across the Outer Rim. Elena felt her blood turn cold. The isolated attack on Kelthara hadn't been an anomaly. It had been a test. The Void-touched were preparing for something much larger. Affected systems: 12 Korean colonies, 3 Zelanti outposts, 2 Horthak research stations, 4 Vorthak mining operations, 7 independent settlements, and... Park paused, checking her readings again. 3 systems with significant Council military installations. The scope was staggering. If the pattern held, the galaxy was about to lose over 200 million inhabitants across multiple species and strategic locations. The Council's investigation teams were still arguing about what had happened to one world, and they were about to face an attack on a scale that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Communication from Earth, Torres announced. Admiral Morrison is requesting a secure conference with all theater commanders. Elena nodded, knowing that the time for passive observation was rapidly coming to an end. The Council had ignored humanity's warnings, dismissed their evidence, and rejected their offers of cooperation. Soon, very soon, they would learn the cost of that arrogance. But first, they would be offered one final chance to listen. Admiral, Commander Zhang said quietly, if the Void-touched succeed in this coordinated attack, the Council species will lose approximately 30% of their military infrastructure and nearly 40% of their economic production capacity. They'll be crippled. Yes, Elena replied, and desperate. Desperate enough to finally take humanity seriously. The secure communication from Earth arrived 20 minutes later, bringing orders that Elena had been expecting for weeks. Phase 2 of the operation was approved. Humanity would soon reveal to the galaxy exactly how much they had learned about fighting monsters that lived between dimensions. The Council was about to discover that their newest member species had been preparing for war, while everyone else had been preparing for business as usual. In the Zelanti homeworld, Ambassador Threxhai sat in his private office, staring at the preliminary reports from the Kelthara investigation. The data made no sense according to any known physics or xenobiology. An entire world's population had simply ceased to exist, leaving no trace of how or why. The only species that had predicted this exact scenario were the humans, and they had been warning about it for years. Threxhai activated his communication array and began composing a message to the human diplomatic vessel. The words came slowly, each one a bitter admission of error. Ambassador Chen, the Zelanti hegemony formally requests emergency consultation regarding the Kelthara incident and human assessment of similar threats. Across the galaxy, similar messages were being drafted by dozens of species as news of the disaster spread. The Council that had laughed at humanity's warnings 3 weeks ago was now desperate for any information about the force that had just demonstrated the ability to make entire worlds go silent. Elena received word of these communications 8 hours later and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Council was finally ready to listen. The question was whether it was already too late for them to hear what humanity really had to say. Because the Void-touched manifestation events that had been detected across 17 systems weren't random attacks. They were positioning moves, establishing dimensional anchor points for something much larger. Something that would make the loss of Kelthara look like a minor skirmish in comparison. Humanity had tried to warn them. Now, they would have to save them, whether the Council wanted to be saved or not. The emergency Council session had been going for 18 hours straight, and the chamber reeked of fear scent from a dozen different species. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the human delegation section, watching the chaos unfold with the patience of someone who had been expecting exactly this moment for 3 years. 17 systems, over 200 million beings, gone. The reports kept coming in, each one more devastating than the last. The Korean Empire had lost 3 major military installations and their entire 4th fleet. The Zelanti hegemony was facing economic collapse as their agricultural worlds went silent one by one. The Horthak Collective had watched their most advanced research stations simply cease to exist, taking decades of scientific progress with them. Council Speaker Vexes Kwan, who had replaced the previous speaker after a vote of no confidence 6 hours ago, raised all 4 of his Vorthak arms for silence. His crystalline features showed stress fractures that hadn't been there when the session began. "The Council recognizes the human delegation," he said, his voice carrying none of the condescension that had characterized previous interactions with humanity. "Ambassador Chen, the affected species have requested that humanity share any information regarding these entities." Sarah stood slowly, noting how every eye in the chamber was now focused on her with desperate attention. The same beings who had laughed at her warnings 4 weeks ago were now hanging on her every word. "The human delegation thanks the Council for this opportunity," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber. "However, before we proceed, I believe it is important to establish the current context of our discussion." She activated the holographic display at the center of the speaking platform, showing a real-time tactical map of the galaxy. Red zones marked the affected systems, yellow zones showed probable next targets, and blue zones indicated remaining Council infrastructure. What drew gasps from the assembly were the green zones, areas marked as secure from void-touched incursion. They formed a perfect defensive perimeter around every human colony and installation in the galaxy. "As this display shows," Sarah continued, "human settlements have experienced 0 void-touched incursions during this crisis. This is not coincidence." The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Ambassador Threx High, his feathers still showing the stress patterns that had appeared after the loss of Kelthara, called out from the Zelanti section. "Are you claiming that humanity has some form of protection against these entities? Some technology or knowledge that you have withheld from the galactic community?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time since anyone had known her, it was not a diplomatic expression. "I am claiming nothing, Ambassador Threx High. I am stating facts." She gestured to the display. "Every human installation is protected by defensive systems specifically designed to counter void-touched manifestation events. These systems have been operational for over 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Slowly, the implications began to sink in. Humanity, the species the Council had dismissed as primitive newcomers, had been preparing for this threat, while everyone else had been ignoring it. "Impossible," declared Councillor Vex, then of the Korean Empire, her scales rippling with agitation. "Our intelligence services would have detected any such technology development. Human capabilities are well documented." "Your intelligence services," Sarah replied evenly, "have been observing what humanity wanted you to observe. Our actual capabilities have remained largely hidden from galactic scrutiny." She touched a control on the platform, and the display shifted to show detailed schematics of devices that looked like nothing in any known technology database. The designs incorporated principles of dimensional physics that most species were still struggling to understand theoretically. "Quantum dimensional stabilizers," Sarah explained. "They create zones of reinforced spacetime that prevent void-touched manifestation events. The technology is derived from 3 years of studying void-touched physics and dimensional mechanics." Dr. Yithkol of the Zelanti Science Coordination leaned forward, his optical organs focusing intently on the schematics. "The mathematical principles underlying these devices. They require an understanding of dimensional interface theory that should be centuries beyond human capabilities." "Should be," Sarah agreed. "But human scientists tend to be very motivated when their species' survival is at stake. We dedicated our best minds to this problem, while the Council chose to pretend the problem didn't exist." The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence as the various delegations processed what they were learning. The humans hadn't just been warning about the void touched, they had been actively preparing to fight them. "Ambassador Chen," the speaker said carefully, "if humanity possesses the technology to defend against these entities, surely you would be willing to share this knowledge to protect all galactic civilizations." Sarah's expression became very serious. "Mr. Speaker, humanity would be delighted to share our defensive technology with species that have shown good faith in addressing the void-touched threat. However, there are certain prerequisites that must be met." "Prerequisites?" Councillor Vex then scales shifted to an aggressive pattern. "You would withhold life-saving technology behind conditions? This is unconscionable, is it?" Sarah asked mildly. The Korean Empire currently has 17 dreadnought fleets positioned along human borders, with standing orders to monitor human expansion activities and intervene if necessary. The Zelanti hegemony has spent the past year filing formal complaints about human trade practices and demanding economic sanctions. The Horthak Collective has repeatedly voted to limit human access to galactic communication networks. She paused, looking around the chamber. Every major power in this chamber has treated humanity as a potential threat to be contained rather than an ally to be welcomed. Now you discover that we possess the only known defense against an existential threat to galactic civilization, and you demand we simply hand it over unconditionally? The speaker's crystalline features shifted into what might have been embarrassment. Ambassador, surely you understand that past political disagreements pale in comparison to the current crisis. Do they? Sarah interrupted. Because from humanity's perspective, the current crisis is simply a larger version of what we've been trying to warn you about for 3 years. The same attitude that led the Council to dismiss our warnings is now leading you to demand our solutions. The chamber descended into chaos as delegations began arguing among themselves. Some species were clearly outraged at humanity's position, while others were beginning to realize that they were in no position to make demands. Lieutenant Admiral Hayes, Sarah's military attaché, stepped forward and whispered something in her ear. Sarah nodded and activated her personal communication device. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings," she announced, her voice cutting through the arguments. "I have just received word that the void-touched manifestation events recorded over the past week were preliminary positioning moves. Long-range sensors are detecting massive dimensional distortions forming in the galactic core region." The fighting stopped instantly. Every being in the chamber turned to look at the holographic display as it shifted to show deep space scanner readings. What appeared on screen made several delegates physically recoil. A dimensional wound was opening in space that dwarfed anything previously recorded. The energy signatures suggested that whatever was coming through would be orders of magnitude more powerful than the entities that had already devastated 17 systems. "Estimated manifestation time is 6 hours, Sarah continued. "The target appears to be the Nexus Station." The Nexus Station was the political and economic heart of the galaxy, a massive orbital city that served as neutral ground for interspecies commerce and diplomacy. It housed over 50 million beings from hundreds of different species, and contained the galaxy's primary communication, trade, and information networks. If the void touched, consumed the Nexus Station, galactic civilization would effectively collapse. "Immediate evacuation of the station is impossible," the speaker said, his voice hollow with shock. "The population is too large, and the time frame too short." "Correct," Sarah agreed. Which brings us to humanity's formal proposal for addressing this crisis. Quote, "Crisis?" She touched her display controls, and the holographic image changed to show fleet deployment patterns around the Nexus Station. Green markers indicated human vessels, while red markers showed Council fleet positions. The United Earth Space Force currently has 237 ships positioned within striking distance of the Nexus Station. These vessels are equipped with weapons systems specifically designed to engage void-touched entities in normal spacetime. The numbers sent a shock through the assembly. Humanity was supposed to have a small exploration fleet, not a battle force that rivaled the major powers' regional fleets. "Our proposal is simple," Sarah continued. "The Council officially recognizes humanity as a full partner in galactic defense, with commensurate authority and representation. In exchange, human forces will engage the void-touch threat at the Nexus Station and provide defensive technology to allied species." "Allied species?" Counselor Vex then asked, suspiciously. "Species that formally acknowledge humanity's equal status in galactic affairs and commit to mutual defense agreements," Sarah clarified. "We are not interested in protecting civilizations that view us as inferiors or threats." The chamber exploded into frantic discussions. Species delegations huddled together, calculating their options. The choice was stark. Accept humanity as an equal partner, or face the void touched alone. Ambassador Threx High was the first to break away from his delegation's discussion. "The Zelanti hegemony formally accepts humanity's proposal," he announced. his voice carrying the weight of defeat. "We acknowledge humanity as an equal galactic power and request alliance status for mutual defense purposes." One by one, other species followed suit. Some did so grudgingly, clearly recognizing they had no other choice. Others seemed almost relieved to finally have someone who understood the threat and knew how to fight it. Counselor Vex, then of the Korean Empire, was among the last to speak. "The Korean Empire acknowledges humanity's equal status and requests alliance," she said, each word clearly painful for her to utter. "However, we reserve the right to review this agreement once the current crisis has passed." Sarah smiled again. And this time, it was genuinely predatory. "Of course, Counselor. Though I should mention that human long-range sensors have detected 17 additional dimensional weak points forming throughout Korean space. The current crisis may last quite a bit longer than you anticipate." The implication was clear. The void touched weren't going away after one attack. This was going to be an ongoing war. And humanity was the only species that had been preparing for it. "The Council accepts humanity's proposal," the speaker announced formally. "Earth is granted full membership status with all associated rights and privileges. Admiral Chen, you have tactical authority over all Allied forces in the defense of the Nexus Station." Sarah nodded respectfully, but internally she was noting the speaker's assumption that she held military rank. The Council still didn't understand how thoroughly they had underestimated human capabilities. "Admiral Hayes," she said to her military attaché, "please signal the fleet to begin Operation Lighthouse." Hayes activated his command communicator. And within seconds, responses began coming in from across the galaxy. The green markers on the tactical display began moving, converging on the Nexus Station with a precision that spoke of months of planning and preparation. "What is Operation Lighthouse?" the speaker asked. "The complete revelation of human military capabilities," Sarah replied. "We've spent 3 years preparing for this war, while the Council debated whether the threat was real. Now you'll see what happens when humans stop hiding and start fighting." The next 6 hours transformed the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. As Council species watched in amazement, human fleets emerged from sensor-dark positions throughout the galaxy, revealing a military infrastructure that had been completely hidden from galactic detection. Vessels using technology that seemed to blend magic and physics converged on the Nexus Station, deploying defensive systems that turned space itself into a fortress. When the massive void-touched entity emerged from the dimensional wound, it found itself facing not helpless prey but a carefully prepared reception committee. Human weapons that fired concentrated bursts of stabilized reality tore through its dimensional defenses, forcing it back into normal space-time where conventional physics applied. The battle lasted 4 hours and was recorded by sensors across the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, void-touched entities were not just resisted, but actively destroyed. The massive entity that had come to consume the Nexus Station was reduced to dissipating energy patterns and dimensional fragments. When it was over, humanity had lost 6 ships and 43 personnel. The Nexus Station was intact, its 50 million inhabitants safe, and the galaxy had witnessed the newcomer species demonstrate military capabilities that exceeded anything the major powers possessed. In the aftermath, as Council species scrambled to negotiate alliance terms and technology-sharing agreements, Sarah Chen stood in the human diplomatic vessel's observation deck, watching the reconstruction efforts beginning around the Nexus Station. Admiral Vasquez joined her, still wearing her combat uniform from the battle. "The Korean Empire is requesting immediate deployment of human defensive systems to their core worlds," Elena reported. "They're offering full technology-sharing agreements and mutual defense pacts. The Zelanti want to discuss integration of their fleets with human command structures. Even the Horthak are hinting at opening their restricted research databases to human scientists." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the galaxy had just learned to be very afraid of what lived in the dark between dimensions. And the minor species? Falling over themselves to join the alliance. Turns out that being protected by the humans is much more appealing than being protected by the Council powers, who couldn't even see this threat coming. Sarah smiled, thinking about the reports that would soon be filed about this crisis. The official records would show that humanity had saved the galaxy from an unknown threat through superior preparation and advanced technology. What they wouldn't show was how carefully this entire scenario had been orchestrated. The void touched were real, and they were dangerous. But humanity had known about them long before their first contact with galactic civilization. Earth's deep space exploration missions had encountered them decades ago, leading to the development of the defensive technologies and military strategies that had just been revealed. The warnings to the Council had been genuine, but they had also been a test. Humanity needed to know whether the galaxy's established powers would listen to reason or dismiss newcomers out of hand. The Council had failed that test spectacularly, and now they would live with the consequences. What are your orders regarding the Council's request for expanded human military presence in their territories? Elena asked. Grant it, Sarah replied. All of it. Deploy defensive systems to any species that requests them. Station human fleets wherever they're wanted. Share technology with anyone who agrees to mutual defense pacts. She paused, watching as human ships began establishing permanent defensive positions around the Nexus station. The age of humanity being treated as galactic children is over, Admiral. From now on, we are the species that other civilizations come to when they need protection from the monsters in the dark. We are the ones with the weapons and knowledge necessary to fight threats that the established powers can't even detect until it's too late. Elena nodded, understanding the implications. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted permanently. The Council species were still numerically and economically dominant, but they were no longer the ultimate authority on military and existential threats. That authority now belonged to the species that had tried to warn them, been dismissed and ridiculed, and then demonstrated the ability to save them when their arrogance nearly got them all killed. The Council's unity had been shattered the moment they realized that their newest member had been preparing for threats they didn't even believe existed. Now they would have to rebuild that unity around humanity's position as the galaxy's primary defensive power. Some species would adapt to this new reality gracefully, recognizing that cooperation with humanity was in their best interests. Others would resist, clinging to old prejudices and assumptions about galactic hierarchies, but in the end, it wouldn't matter what they preferred. The void touched were still out there, and humanity was the only species that knew how to fight them effectively. The galaxy would follow humanity's lead, or it would face the dark between dimensions alone. As Sarah watched the human fleet maintain its protective formation around the Nexus station, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The warnings had been ignored. The unity of the Council had been ruined by their own arrogance, and humanity had emerged as the galaxy's newest superpower. Everything had gone exactly according to plan.